So the doctor's opinion as an introduction to sponsorship, it's been on my heart for a while that, only a proportion of folks that go through the steps actually choose to take others through the steps, and that's counterproductive. It means there's less folk available to sponsor others, and it means that the person's sobriety can get very shaky, and they can often end up using again if they're not working with others consistently. So, why do persons choose not to sponsor? Well, it can be self-centeredness, laziness, and fear. Those are the prime reasons why people choose not to take others through the steps: fear, self-centeredness, and laziness. Part of the fear sometimes is folks don't think they have the correct information, which ironically is often true. Folk are churned off like a sausage factory. We barely a screw be able to take folk through the steps, which is a huge problem. It's a very broad world, the world of sponsorship. Some folk take through steps in 4 or 5 hours, others will do a step a month and take a year. I happen to personally think that, 3 or 4 weeks is ample time to consistently get through a thorough round of the steps to produce the miracle of sobriety. So on that first call, I want to know, do they have any literature? I want to know when was the last time they had a fortnight or more of continuous sobriety. I want to know what the drug of choice is, the quantities involved, and the frequency and duration of usage. I want to know if they're available to have a chat for half an hour every day. I want to know if they're willing to commit to going through all 12 steps sober. And I want to know the time of the next phone call, the very next day, to start the work immediately. I'll also ask them to write a consequences list and read step 1 out of the 12 and 12 and listen to the step 1 podcast off the Anonymous YouTube channel. And on the very next day, they will have sent me their consequence list, which is a very simple list of a dozen or 1.5 dozen items that briefly describe the circumstance of their addiction. And then on that next day, we will spend half an hour. Half an hour is enough on the phone for me. I don't want to be talking into a plastic device more than half an hour. I'm quite sure that's not just me. And folk forget things that you talk about at the beginning of the call with much longer, and plus they get fed up with it. So I find half an hour, 40 minutes is more than ample time for me. And we'll spend that time talking through their consequences list, just spending a couple of minutes on each item. And that's them getting honest about how unmanageable life is, drinking and drugging, using and boozing. And so that will form almost the entirety of that first half an hour Stepwork phone call. I'll also have sent them the 12 suggestions, which I'll post in the chat in a moment. And if necessary, I'll spend a couple of minutes explaining to them what they are. They're very simple things like get a home group, get to face-to-face meetings, share regularly, build a sober network, try and stay in prayer, have a go at meditation, find some spiritual literature, consistent step work, good self-care, those kinds of things. So on the second call, at the end of that first call, after having showed them the suggestions and completely took through their consequences list, I will then arrange the time the next call for the next day. And on that, and in between, I'll ask them to do the podcast on step 1 of the CA channel, also read step 1 out of the 12 and 12. I'll also ask them to read Bill's story, which we've just read in this meeting. And then the second call, I will take them through, I'll walk them through the important bits of the doctor's opinion, which is what we're about to do right now. So the doctor's opinion consists of 2 letters from Dr. Silkworth, who was a very highly paid, highly esteemed worker with alcoholic addicts back in the 30s in America. It consists of 2 letters from Silkworth, a paragraph introduction from Wilson, and a few paragraphs between the 2 letters of Silkworth from Wilson. So Wilson introduces him saying he's a knowledgeable chap, and it should be very interesting to anyone that's got a problem with addiction what a doctor has to say about addiction. So Silkworth gives his credentials, and he says that he worked with a guy who was a wealthy businessman who was a hopeless alcoholic. Now, in the big book, wherever you see the word alcoholic, you can just substitute it for addict if you wish. Wherever you see alcohol, you can substitute it for drugs. And it's that simple, It's very important that persons get identification. Some drug addicts struggle to get identification with the big book. It's essential that changes. You must make your addict understand that alcohol is chemically, scientifically, and grammatically a drug, period. An alcoholic is a drug addict, period, regardless of what they think about it. And all drugs produce a form of drunkenness, and the 12 steps produces permanent sobriety achieved on a daily basis. So it's really important you get your addict to understand that wherever they see alcohol, they can substitute it for drugs. Where it says alcoholic, they can substitute it for addict. Wilson was a fall down, wet your pants, suicidal, manic, depressive, drunken addict. That's what Wilson was, but for the grace of God. So Wilson comes along for the third treatment at this very expensive rehab hospital in America, where Silkworth's the main man. And he says, not only did he come for treatment, he said, I've actually got a new treatment I'm trying, and I want you to let me talk to the other patients here. And so he does do that. Silkworth reluctantly agrees. And Silkworth says, I've known dozens of other folk who had tried other methods but failed completely. So he recommends the group. He says, you can rely on anything they say about themselves. That's the end of the first letter of Silkworth, the beginning of the doctor's opinion. Now we've got 3 chapters from Wilson. And in here, Wilson makes the point about the physical aspect. That is to say that if you ingested drugs, I know there's 1 or 2 members in the room that have got drugs in the system right now, you're welcome here. I wish there was another 80 folk in this room, with room for 100. And when you've got drugs in your system, the drugs want more drugs. Your body's lusting and yearning for more drugs. That's reality, whatever the drugs are. So Wilson is making the point about the physical aspect of the phenomena of craving. And it's not just simply the case that an addict is maladjusted to life or in full flight from reality, or that they're an outright mental defective. There's truth in all those elements, folks. But there's more to it than that. It's a threefold problem: spiritual, mental, physical. When an addict is using and boozing, they're so caught up in the physical and mental aspects, they're unaware of the spiritual aspects. That's why when you get clean, familiarizing yourself with God, a higher power, the spiritual aspect is essential. It's a spiritual program, which means it pertains to the spirit, the unseen part of you. An addict is in spiritual bondage, which results in mental distortion, which results in behavioral distortion. When you get right with God, God sorts your spirit out and sets your spirit free. Generally, you've got clarity of thought and purpose, and your behavior changes through these 12 steps. So in the book, the problem is it's got many descriptions. The problem's got various descriptions, and the solution's got various descriptions. The problem is called the allergy. It's called the illness. It's called the problem. It's called the disease. The solution is called a design for living. The proposals, simple suggestions, program of action, and other terms. The answer. Okay, so he goes on to say that it's this allergy that's the main problem, and folks say that alcoholism is not a disease. Well, you don't catch it in the same way you can breathe in the flu. But everyone I know that's had it has caught it from being around folk that already had it. So you contract the disease of addiction by being around folk that are already deceased. See? So it is a disease. And also anything that sets you ill at ease is a dis-ease, which is the origin of the English word disease. Now, my friend in the room is clear enough to receive this message. It's important when you're about to start working with someone, you have to discern whether they're mentally and emotionally able to receive the message. So then we come into the second letter of Silkworth in the doctor's opinion. And he says this subject should be really interesting to alcoholic addicts. And he puts his credentials again that he's been doing this for years. And that he commends the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And for me, this paragraph here is one of the most important in the doctor's opinion. We doctors have realised for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholic addicts. Its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. With our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we're perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. Well, that's a very clever and professional way of saying God. That's what Silkworth's saying there, that this 12-step program is moral psychology plus divine power. That's precisely what it is. He says the docs have realised that there's some need of moral psychology, but the powers of good that lie outside of human knowledge. And he mentions Wilson again, that came with some new ideas that he put into practical application at once. See, so he took action with the knowledge he had, and he wanted to carry this message to others. So Silkworth then commends the ethos of 12-step recovery, the community spirit. There's no finance involved, and that they believe in themselves, and still more in the power that pulls chronic alcoholic addicts back from the gates of death. The action of alcohol and drugs upon chronic alcoholic addicts is a manifestation of an allergy. See, well, if you've got a nut allergy, you don't eat nuts. You've got to stay honest, folks, about step one. You've got to stay honest. The human problem is rebellion, the result of which is delusion. Right? If you're an addict, right, and you're not staying around the solution and practicing the program, then you're being dishonest with yourself about the work you've done. Right? If you've got honest in step one that all that crazy stuff happens for some very simple reasons, i.e. the physical phenomena of craving and the mental obsession, then for you to use again is to be in practical denial of all that truth. Now you're free to choose, but you're not free of consequence. Okay, so you've got an allergy. Now God's power can set you free from the allergy, and you can be permanently free on a daily basis, yes. But you've got to accept the illness still exists, and stay honest. And I'll start to wrap it up with this, Stacey. You can't use or booze successfully. So the fellowship, the literature, the meetings, service, sponsorship, Stepwork, morning devotions, nightly inventory will keep you honest. It will keep you honest in relation to your problem and the solution. Folk that stop coming to meetings, they cease to find out what happens to folk that stop coming to meetings. More meetings, more chances. The group sponsors the newcomer. The first purpose of the group is the teaching and practice of these 12 steps. So it's all about step one, folks. I believe it's the hardest step to work properly. When I hear people arrogantly assert that to them step one's not that meaningful, I would like to shake them and say to them, well, how many years did it take you to get step one? 15 years. Yeah, it's the hardest step to get. An addict dies every 6 seconds without ever getting step one in place. Right? To work step one properly, it's very important to do it. In NA, they spend up to 2 months on step one. It's well worth 4 or 5 hours to get a proper step one in place, folks. Considering you sit around lunched out for hours and weeks on gear, it's not a big ask what the program asks you to do to stay sane, sober, moral, prudent. And so what happens is if they pick up again, their problems become astonishingly difficult to solve. The message that can interest and hold alcoholic addicts has to have depth and weight, and your ideas must be grounded in a power greater than yourselves if you're going to recreate your lives. So in summary, friends, all you really need to know initially if you're about to sponsor for the first time is how you're going to get them through step 1, 2, and 3 initially, because that's likely to take you, 4 or 5 days or more to get them through the first 3 steps if you're working together each day. There's a podcast on the Gay Anonymous YouTube channel that a lady in Canada with many years of continuous experience of working with others, taking through the steps, she and I recorded a podcast making it exceptionally simple to complete 4 and 5. It's a problem that people log into meetings and say, "Oh, it's a problem." That's not a solution focused message. That is not helpful. It's only a problem if you've not done it right and you've not been taught how to do it right. It's exceptionally simple to make a list of things you're angry about, things you're scared of, and harms you've done. That's very simple. You start the list and you finish the list. Most people can write things they're angry about in one sitting. It's the wrong spiritual experience to be spending hours, obsessing about the past. Whatever you write in step 4, guess what? You're already handling it, and the other folk are already handling it. You're already handling it. So it's somewhat retrospective. It's just a case of pen to paper, start the list and finish the list. Never in the evening, always in the morning or early afternoon. Never discuss the contents of a step 4 with anyone except your sponsor until you've completed all 12 steps, except in relation to a specific step 9 amends. Using discretion and wisdom is really, really important, and discretion and discernment are two of the things that come often quite late on for addicts in recovery. So yeah, it's remarkably simple to complete 4 and 5. I share this because it's a huge problem. In the real world, folks, less than half of the folk that go through the 12 steps go on to consistently sponsor. That's the truth of the matter. And as I say, it's fear and laziness and self-centeredness, and they're free to do that. You know what I mean? It's not a cult. You know what I mean? But that's the reality of it, and it's a double-edged sword because there's not enough sponsors out there available because of that. And then the folks that choose not to often get on shaky ground and end up drinking and drugging, and some of them die. So I hope that's helpful in some way. I'm going to pass it back to the wonderful Stacey there, and I want to thank you for letting me share.
Wow. Thank you, Paul. That was really well explained.